the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
Hello everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show. Another episode on what the story that dominates the news, dominates our thinking, dominates all the discussions seemingly out there. Everybody wants to talk about coronavirus. A lot of what I'm going to say, kind of is a restructuring of what I've already said. There's not a lot new. There's not a lot new in terms of how I think about this issue. But I wanted maybe to frame it as, what should we be focusing on now as advocates of capitalism, as people who believe in freedom, as people who want to achieve a better world, the people who are worried about the spread of the coronavirus, but also about the government's response and about the possible world post-coronavirus. What should we be focused on right now in terms of our advocacy, in terms of how we approach this? And so, because I think it's important. I think how we respond, what we say, what we do, what we push for, is going to it has the potential to have an influence, because there are almost no contrarian voices out there. Almost everybody is falling in line. Almost everybody has just succumbed to the statist agenda, whether Republicans or Democrats. There's no difference. They're all the same. And they're all advocating for the same thing. They all want to spend gazillion dollars. They all want to force us all to stay home. And they all want a massive sacrifice from all of us. They all ignore us as individuals and our individual values. So I think it's an opportunity to be a contrarian voice out there, opportunity to get yourself heard, an opportunity to actually present an individualist perspective on what is going on in the world and present alternative solutions and try to influence how the world looks once this coronavirus becomes less of an issue. It's probably going to be an issue for a long time, but less of an issue. So I want to talk about, I want to start with kind of our attitude towards what has already been done and what is going on. Oops, let me just do something here. So, we're mostly in stay-at-home mode. That's by coercive force of the government. We have basically shortages in equipment, shortages in protective gear. We have massive shortages in testing. Testing is still nowhere near where it should be. There is no end to this. Some states like Virginia have announced a stay-at-home order until June 2nd. So April, May, 2 months, right? 2 whole months. Now, hopefully then the weather will kick in, and hopefully coronavirus is seasonal, and there'll be less cases, and hopefully all this locking down will have helped, and then we'll all go out and we'll have a good time during the summer, and come September, October, we'll be right back where we started. Coronavirus will pop up again. There'll be more and more cases. Hospitals get overwhelmed. They want to flatten the curve. We have to go back home. Of course, when I say we all go back to normal in the summer, that assumes that in the summer you have a job. That assumes that your small business is still functioning, which is dubious for many of us. That assumes life can go back to normal. Because at that point, who knows the level of destruction that has been inflicted on the economy, the number of people who are unemployed, the number of business owners who have shuttered their business and are now unemployed. So, and then we start back up in the fall. Now, hopefully in the fall, and this is hopefully, prayingly, I guess, we're better prepared. The government is now testing more. They have more ventilators. They have more hospital beds, and they're ready for it. And therefore, the stay at home doesn't have to be quite as expansive. And we do this, I guess, every season until we all have it in 2 years. And at that point, we have herd immunity or we have a vaccine and we solve it. In the meantime, we have lost at least a portion of 2 years of our lives. Many of you, of us, have lost jobs, have lost wealth, have lost businesses. You know, what should be our response? Now, my view is the first thing. The first thing is that we need to be outraged. We need to be outraged by everything that has happened. I see too many people accepting the shutdowns, accepting the federal government's decrees, accepting that Donald Trump did the best that he could, or that Como is whatever. I mean, there's way too much acceptance of authority. There's way too much acceptance of in a sense, a strong man being strong in the face of a crisis. God damn it, these people are utter, complete fools. They have no idea what they are doing. They are predominantly engaged in destruction. They are unthinking. They do not plan. They have no data. They are complete failures. Complete failures. And I don't care who you're talking about. I mean, I include here, I don't know, the doctor who everybody praises working on Trump's team. I mean, if the doctor was honest, he would call it like it is. Not of course he'd get fired, but good. Everybody should be fired. Everybody competent should be fired from Trump's administration because they should all speak up. And until we speak up about the complete failures, yeah, I mean, we can blame China all day long. And now, you know, the new excuse I've got. Trump was too busy with impeachment. The Democrats distracted him. He couldn't focus on this. If he had focused, everything would have been fantastic. So we need to be outraged. Outraged by the lack of testing. Outraged by the lack of data. Outraged by the lack of information. Outraged by the lack of honesty from every portion of our government. Outraged that the only two ideas that they could come up with are nothing or stay-at-home shutdown. That their entire scope of their thinking, of their attempts to solve the problem, involved these two possibilities, and that's it, nothing else. Not respond, shut everybody down. Shut all the economy down, shut activity down. That's all they can imagine. It's all they can think about. I mean, I can think of, if I tried, I'm sure, 10, 12 different alternatives in between those two. And now that somebody has shut down, like New York, well, now everybody wants to shut down because they don't want to be the ones that were too lax. And why think when you can just emulate? I mean, our politicians in here across the board are second-handed and unthinking. We should be outraged by the fact that almost nobody talks about the fact the death rate in this disease is primarily old people. And I repeat this because I've said this from the beginning, but I watch television. I don't watch a lot, but a little bit. I look at the news. I read articles, and there's almost no discussion of this, as if it's somehow tainted to say people over 70 have a really relatively high level of mortality. Under 70, if you've got diabetes, heart disease, or some other immune deficiency, you're also at high risk. But the rest of us, the risk is not zero, but the risk is not zero in anything one does in life. The rest of us have a low probability of dying, have a low probability of ending up in the emergency room, in the hospital. And if we do, we're likely to survive. Very likely to survive. You don't change your entire life for small odds like that of catching a disease that is probabilistically not going to destroy your life. So why can't we talk? Why can't we talk as a culture, as a world, in politics, in media, and elsewhere? Why can't we talk about the fact that this is a disease that is killing old people? And if we really cared about it not killing old people, we would focus all of our energy, all of our efforts, all of our focus on protecting them. If we took, a fraction of the $2.2 trillion stimulus package and just said, we are now going to try to isolate every person in the United States who are over the age of 70. We're going to provide them with a budget for groceries to be delivered to them. And we are going to make it as easy as possible for them not to leave their home until we figure this out. Now, notice that that has very little negative economic consequences because most old people don't work. So, why can't we do that? We can't even talk about it, it seems. And yeah, it's a lot of people. I don't know what the numbers are for the number of people over 75, over 70. It's a lot of people. But it's less than locking up everybody, having everybody stay at home, giving out $2.2 trillion to what? To bail out everybody. It's less than keeping all these children away from school. Why are we doing that? We're doing that, the logic says, because the children get the disease. Nothing really bad happens to them for the most part. But then they will go to their grandparents and transmit it to their grandparents. So isolate the grandparents from the grandkids. But no, we can't talk about that. And I think it's a number of things. It's a number of things. It's one, you can't discriminate. You can't talk about old people as different than everybody else, any more than you can talk about differences between men and women, I guess. And there's a certain patriotism. There's a certain appeal to, we're all in this together, that appeals to people of left and right. It reminds me of the neocons who before 9/11, Peter Brooks was one of them. Peter Brooks? David Brooks. David Brooks was one of them, who was urging for a war, for a terrorist attack, so we could have a war, because the war would give us a cause to fight together towards. And it's like, people think this is cool. We've now got, real leadership. Look at Como. Oh my God, he's so presidential. What does presidential mean? Authoritarian. He's got command of the situation. He knows what to do. He's on emergency footing. People love this stuff. And they love the collectivism that's involved. So we can't identify old people as problematic, as the problem, and solve the problem. Not old people, so we're going to ignore them and let them all die. No. Let's focus our efforts on them, but let everybody else live. Because you can't do that. You can't discriminate. You can't profile. You can't pick out certain people. Unless you're going to condemn them, like bankers or businessmen or billionaires. Them you can condemn, but you can't say, we're going to just help old people because they're the targeted audience. We're going to help them stay isolated. But no, we have to shut down everybody. And by the way, if you are, and I've said this over and over again, if you have diabetes or heart disease or high blood pressure or the various conditions that make you more susceptible to die from this virus, and there are lists out there, you can go find them. It's hard because they don't like to publish the stuff. And only now are they releasing some of the data on Americans. Again, we don't have data. We'll get to that in a minute. But just isolate yourself. Take care of yourself. Try not to get the virus. But the fact is, the rest of us are probably going to get it over the next 18 months. Almost all of us are going to get it. And indeed, won't actually getting it be part of the solution by creating herd immunity? By creating so many people who have it, the virus has nowhere to travel, nowhere to go. It just dies out. It's that or a vaccine. There's no other alternative. Otherwise, we'll be in constant relief, shutdown, relief, shutdown, relief, shutdown mode. So let's discriminate. And I don't think you need to use coercive measures for this. I think you can use voluntary measures. Though, given that we all pay for health care of old people through Medicare, maybe we have to coerce. And in terms of coercion, which I'm against, sometimes in a mixed economy, there's no alternative but. We're coerced to pay Medicare. I'd like to keep these old people out of the hospitals. And by the way, I'm getting close to that age where I could be categorized as one of those old people, right? So I have nothing against them because I'm going to be one of them very, very soon, right? Given that if it's voluntary and they don't act on it, we have to pay, it's not outrageous to think of coercion, but only in the context of a mixed economy, in a mixed world in which we live, because there are lots of other things we could have done and should have done and would have done if we were free that would have avoided us getting into this situation. So we should be outraged that our government won't even consider treating old people differently than everybody else. And then we should be outraged at the fact that for a month, now a lot of people are saying the Chinese lied, the Chinese deceived, the Chinese held back on the true scope of the issue. They did. I mean, they're an authoritarian government. The whole point for us is not to get to where we are like China, which we're becoming more like China. We're not becoming less like China. You can criticize China all you want, but we're going to wake up very soon, and we're not going to be any different than China. We're going to be relying on authoritarian thugs to rule our lives, to dictate all our decisions. And at some point, even today, I mean, there's information being hidden from us. There's information that's incomplete. There's our leaders have lied to us. Our leaders have deceived us. Maybe not to the same extent as the Chinese have, but it's an issue of degree, not an issue of substance. But yes, the Chinese deferred, waited, it was late. But Trump put on a travel ban. At the point where he put on a travel ban, he knew something was wrong. We have intelligence services. We have experts on these things. You would think that they were figuring out what was going on in China. And by that point, information was coming out of China. By that point, they weren't hiding it. Maybe they were hiding the extent. Maybe they're still hiding the extent. I don't know. But by late January, we knew because we put on a travel ban. Now, at the time, I had Amesh Adalja on the show who said travel bans don't work. The virus is already in America. It's going to play out. Okay, so the travel ban maybe slowed things down. But what did we do? So it was good, you could argue, maybe, because it bought us time. But that's only an argument if you do something in the time that you're buying. What did we do? Instead of, in late January, deregulating FDA and CDC and getting testing done and approving testing equipment from everybody and ramping up testing on a massive, unprecedented scale, because that is the one way you deal with the pandemic. Test everybody and isolate the people who have it. And isolate the people who have it came in contact with. It's not impossible to do. The South Koreans have done a pretty good job at it. Instead of doing that, no, Trump said, oh, this is just like the flu. It's no big deal. We don't have to do anything. Nothing's going on. So for a month, we procrastinated. We bought the time and we procrastinated. Why didn't the government put out a bid? So we knew that we could model this thing. And by early February, we started seeing what was going on in Italy. Or sometime in, late February, early March. Why don't we put out a bid at that point? I don't know how much a ventilator costs. Let's say a ventilator costs $10,000. Imagine the government would put out a bid and say, all right, we're short 100,000 ventilators. We are willing to buy 100,000 ventilators at a flat rate of $15,000 each. You get a huge profit. We don't mind because we want to ramp up production of ventilators, and we're in the market, and the lives of people are important, and we're willing to buy all the ventilators you can produce. Do you have any doubt that American manufacturers would be ramping up and building ventilators that they could make huge profit on? By the way, the same with masks. The same with all the protective gear that we are now short on. Where were we in February? Where were we in March? Why weren't we just putting out bids above market price, significantly above market price? Give them huge profits. But huge profits are huge incentives. Huge profits reallocate resources in the marketplace. Instead of a $2.2 trillion, I don't know what to call it, stimulus package, we could have stimulated the production of the things we need to fight this thing. But no, none of that was done. None, and again, this is not science fiction. This is not anything complex. Now, we are benefiting today from hindsight to some extent, but We have leaders who are supposed to get the data and have a plan on how to deal with it. And the data suggested, and we've been talking about shortages of ventilation, shortages of masks, shortages and all these other things. We have been talking about this for weeks and weeks and weeks. Why haven't they adopted a simple solution? Pay people to produce it. Instead of now in a stimulus bill having $100 billion to give to hospitals, money they won't see for another year or so, probably. Why wasn't there emergency legislation to allocate, $10 billion for hospitals to be able to rent out spaces to set up emergency rooms or whatever hospitals need to expand and to grow their capacity to deal with this shit? Why isn't that being done right now? Why isn't money being allocated to that if you're going to allocate money to hospitals? Instead, we've got $180 billion to basically nationalize the hospital system, which I think is the ultimate goal. If our leadership in Congress, at the White House, in the state houses, really cares about this thing, really cares about saving the lives of seniors, why aren't they focused on saving the lives of seniors? Because they're not. They spend much more resources shutting us down and then bailing us out. Shut them out, shut down the economy, then bail it out, and increase your power. I mean, we have this amazing productive capacity in the United States. We have a dynamic, innovative system in the United States, still with all its problems. Why haven't we used it? Not used it by forcing companies to make it. Use it by incentivizing companies to make it, which is the American way, not the fascist way. And the same with antivirals, testing we talked about, but antivirals and vaccines. We should be pre-buying them. We should be encouraging companies to invest in them. And we should be taking all the roadblocks away. And just to give you an example of a roadblock, the masks, the cotton in the masks has to be produced in the United States. I mean, that is nuts. As I've said before, tariffs should be lowered to zero. Requirements to be made in the U.S. should be eliminated. Regulations should be eviscerated. If we care about human life, if we care about the lives of the people who are going to die of this disease, then what are we waiting for? What is this government waiting for? They're sitting on their hands. No, they're not sitting in their hands. They're using their hands to strangle us, hardworking Americans. To strangle you, the small business owner. To strangle you, the employee of the small business owner. They're killing you. In the name of what? Safety. Safety, the excuse for authoritarians. Whose safety? If you care about the people who are likely to die of this, people over the age of 70, then do something about it. Not by strangling me, but by increasing the resources available to them. There are so many ways in which unleashing American innovation, imagination, entrepreneurship, profit-seeking would solve. Instead, we got bureaucrats standing in everybody's way, destroying our economy, limiting our freedom, telling us when we can go outside, where we can walk, who we can walk with, how many people can get together. I mean, I can't remember if I told this, but yesterday there was a guy swimming just outside where I live, swimming in the lagoon here, and only guy. I mean, nobody. Hundreds of meters away, there was nobody. Literally, one person swimming. And a police boat shows up to tell him to get out, to go to land. I guess you're not socially distancing yourself when you're swimming. No, because you were told to be in your home, not to be out swimming. And you have to do what you were told. Rather than what you should be told is, don't put yourself in a dangerous situation by hanging out with lots of people who might have the disease and you might catch it from them. That would be good instruction. That could be enforced. But no, we have to regiment the details. The day I can drive the car, when I can go walk my dog, where I can walk my dog, how far I can go. And the fact is that because from the beginning we haven't focused on old people. You see all these stories now coming out. The original, of course, deaths in the United States came out of an old age home facility in Seattle, where a number of patients were sick. But now it's spreading to other old. But if we had identified it as old people and asked those facilities to lock down 2 months ago, then we wouldn't see all these parents and grandparents dying for nothing. And we should also put their deaths in perspective. And I know this is hard to talk about. It's difficult to talk about. But the fact is, if somebody's 85, 87, and they've got something, and we're going to stop the world, their life expectancy is probably 3 to 5 years out. We're going to stop the entire world. We're going to stop everything so that they don't die now. We're going to sacrifice everybody so they don't die now when they're going to die in 2, 3 years max. It's insanity. Truly insanity. In Kentucky, Bree says they locked down the old age homes a month ago. It should have been done 2 months ago, and it should have been done nationwide, and it should have been done not just at old age homes. But the fact is, this is what people want. They want heroic government to right to the rescue. They want powerful politicians to tell them what to do and how to do it. All right, so Daniel gives us some stats. A high-end ventilator, now this is high-end on ventilator pricing, is $50,000, $50,000 per ventilator, which is, probably on the, as he says, a high-end, right? There's probably cheaper ventilators, right? The U.S. was short about 760,000 ventilators. So let's say we take my 50% markup, and you don't have to make it 50%, you can make it 20%. You still have a good profit, but let's say the 50%. So I'm willing to pay $75,000 per ventilator. Imagine we'd put that out 2 months ago. And we're talking about 75, even for companies that typically charge $25,000 a vent, so they'll get a 300% markup. Even if all that was done, that would have cost us $57 billion. A huge amount of money. Huge amount of money. You could argue wasteful. But $58 billion is, I can't do math at this hour, and I'm kind of tired. Take 2.2 trillion. How many times does 57 billion go into that? Well, 40 plus. About 40 times. And that's at 50% markup on the highest, most expensive ventilator. Assume you set it at 55,000. So yeah, maybe the high-end ventilator, wouldn't have much of an incentive to make a lot more. Though five extra thousand is not bad. 10% markup. But all the people who make them at 30,000 or 40,000 have a huge incentive. Imagine if you did it with masks, and if you did that with all the protective equipment, and you put aside $100 billion to do all that. A lot of money. But nothing as compared to the 2.2 trillion. And remember, the 2.2 trillion came after the first 8 billion, and then was it 30 billion, and then 2.2 trillion. So We've gone through, and now they're talking about another $2 trillion. Chandler's happy because he's going to get $1,200. Enjoy the $1,200. I hope you use some of it to support the Yaron Brook Show. That would be a good use of the $1,200. So that's the math for you. And then let's extrapolate. If you could extrapolate, what would it cost to make sure that every 70-year-old who couldn't afford, delivery food and delivery services had it? Okay, my guess is another $100 billion. Because a lot of them are already in old age homes. And they can, maybe we'd have to do a bailout of old age homes because it would become difficult for them because staff, it would be attrition of staff. So let's say another $100 billion, $200 billion to support old age homes and to support poor old people who couldn't afford to get delivery food and people to take care of them. And you don't shut down the economy because, again, old people are not part of the economy for the most part. So we need to be outraged. We need to offer solutions. I just did. Market-based solutions. We need to focus on the vulnerable. That's a solution. We need to say no to new spending. No to shutting down our lives. No to shutting down our choices. No to shutting down our pursuit of our values. No to stimulus packages. We have to accept the fact that people are going to die. It's a fact. People die of lots of things all the time. Yeah, part of the solutions would be deregulate. Get rid of licensing laws. Get rid of, red tape across the board. We should be proposing ways in which we could privatize the function of the FDA, privatize the function of many of these medical institutions that could be private. We should articulate the case for how a free market, a pure free market, a real free market, a capitalist market would deal with the pandemic. I did that in a Twitter, in a long Twitter thing, and I saw an objectivist criticize that and say, you shouldn't do that because we don't know how a real free market would do it. You can't imagine. And I often say this. Often people say, well, how would a free market deal with this? And I say, well, who knows? The beauty of a free market is they come up with solutions I would never imagine. But you got to at least indicate, you got to get some proposals. You can say, look, I don't know exactly how to work out, but here's some ideas. You got to show that we have answers. And there are people who are going to say, no matter what, the hospitals are overcrowded. Why? If you isolate the people who need hospitalization, then they're not going to get infected and they're not going to need the hospital. You don't flatten the curve by keeping me home. You flatten the curve by keeping my parents home. You flatten the curve by keeping grandparents and parents from getting the illness. I can get the illness, and I'm not going to overwhelm the hospital. They will. Keep me away from them. Don't allow me to visit them. And the problem is that people can't think scientifically, can't think. Young are carriers and asymptomatic, but the people who are in the hospital are not asymptomatic. The people who are in the hospital are people who are suffering because they got this. The people who are in the hospital are old people. And if the young who are asymptomatic never went next to an old people because you wouldn't allow old people to interact with young people, then the old people would not show up in hospitals and the hospitals would not be overwhelmed. And in a free market, Hospitals would have spare beds, would have spare facilities, would have the capacity to deal with things that you throw at them. They'd have long-term planning. They'd plan for epidemics. Insurance companies would plan for epidemics. The only people who don't plan are politicians. They have no long-term incentives. We believe, and you hear this rhetoric over and over and over again, markets are short-term. Business is short-term. But governments think long-term. BS. Business is long-term. Hospitals would plan for it. The reasons they don't today is there's no benefit to planning. Their capacity is dictated by regulation. Their capacity is dictated by government. The capacity in hospitals is not a choice hospitals make. Just ask the State Board of Medicine in the state of New York, which dictated how much vacant beds can be in a hospital. Hospital capacity is completely politicized. A market would not allow a crisis like this to happen. It would plan for it. It would have contingencies. Businesses have contingencies, have emergency procedures. Know what will happen if they lose 50% of their customers. Know what will happen if they lose 50% of their suppliers. Businesses think these things through. You go to any big business and ask for their contingency plans if things go bad. And any decent business has them. But unless we're willing to stand up and declare that with confidence, the statists win. And the statists are winning because the American people are open to them. They're not open to our ideas, and we won't even make them. There's so many people who follow me on Twitter and Facebook and here. Yeah, free markets are good, except when it's inconvenient. Except when I can't imagine how a free market would solve the problem. You couldn't imagine an iPhone. You couldn't imagine the internet. You couldn't imagine anything that the free market has brought us. All right, I should stop yelling. So we got to stand up for capitalism. We got to stand up for individualism. We got to stand up for choice, for values, for making decisions for ourselves, for focusing. You know, one of the things that has come through really clear in this crisis is that our leaders don't think. There is an unthinking across the board. They don't consider alternatives. They don't weigh. They don't think probabilistically. They don't accumulate evidence. They don't seek data. They seek experts to tell them what to think, to tell them what to do. We live in a culture that's unthinking, the anti-enlightenment culture, and a culture that's rejected reason, that's rejected thinking, and that adores politicians. Adores politicians. Politicians who know nothing, who are experts at nothing, who can't even get the resources together of experts to solve a problem. All they're interested in is being right, being reelected, appeasing their voters, appeasing whoever. Unthinking is the way I would categorize how leaders have responded to this crisis. And there are a few healthcare professionals out there, like Amesh Adolja, and a few others I've read their op-eds in Washington Post and New York Times that have said everything that I just said. Let us cocoon the old. In other words, separate the old from everybody else. Don't shut down the economy. Don't keep everybody home. Cocoon the elderly. Test, test, test. Identify people with the virus. Isolate them. So it's a lot of work, a lot of planning, a lot of logistics, a lot of thought. But scientists back this, and the only real reason I think a lot of scientists today are so focused on shutting everything down is because they don't believe there's any other alternative given the politics. Not because they believe this is the best solution. I mean, one of the things I've heard is that a lot of them are afraid to speak up. A lot of them are afraid to speak up against Trump, or to speak up against Cuomo, or to speak up against the authorities that are shutting us down. Fauci is not a model for this at all. He's conventional. And I don't get a sense that he knows more than anybody else, or that he's thinking more than anybody else. He's within the administration, somebody who's at least honest enough to take it like it is. But I don't see any solutions, any alternatives, any interesting things. I would take Amesh a million times over Fauci any day. And I think the number of scientists who are being interviewed about this that are far more knowledgeable and understanding than he is. And he's in politics, so maybe he's super knowledgeable and super knows everything. But he's in politics, so he has to stay quiet. He has to follow. Yeah, on certain things he could contradict Trump, but don't go too far because you'll lose your job. The CDC, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the CDC wanted to do things very differently early on. And that basically Trump silenced them and shut them down to prevent them from doing the things that needed to be done. Yes, I love to yell. What can I do? I tried before not to yell, and it came right back because some of you guys are making me angry. I mean, this is not rocket science. But if you're a collectivist and you don't want to think for yourself and you want to just buy into the rhetoric that's out there, this is what happens. And let me tell you, you should be enraged. You should be enraged by what has transpired in this country over the last 3 months. Not sit at home and twiddle your thumbs. You should be fighting this. You should be writing. You should be speaking. You should be engaged in activism in every way that you can. You should be outraged. You know, we're going to get to the point where the individual rights of 300 million people are constrained, not a little bit, not by a little bit regulation here or there, but where we're kept at home because our politicians are cowards and are non-thinkers, anti-thinkers. Anyway. Some questions. If you could you touch on the Hahnemann Hospital owner, Joel Freeman? I guess he denied the city to open his hospital to help COVID-19 patients, and everyone is seemingly blaming greed. I haven't read the story. I should read the story. I'll try to look it up and read it. But generally, I'm a big believer in private hospitals are private hospitals. You should be able to do with your hospital as you see fit. I think. So I don't know the details of the case. I'm not going to comment on it. I'll look it up, though. How long should we tolerate a shutdown before ARI organizes civil disobedience? 2 months is ridiculous. We need to fight. ARI can organize civil disobedience tomorrow. What, 5 people will show up? What are you talking about? I mean, there's so much advocacy, education, speaking, yelling on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, on every medium available to you before we get to the stage of civil disobedience. And civil disobedience has to be on a principle. And ARI has to fight for the right kind of principles. But nobody's going to join us right now on these principles. We still have so much work to do. And look, ARI is not an activist organization. ARI is an educational organization. But nothing is stopping any of you from starting up an activist organization that wants to protest what is going on today in America And I'm sure I would be very supportive of that. So do it. Don't look like everybody else in the culture for leaders to guide us and to solve all our problems. You got a problem? You go out there and do it. That's not true about AOI's viewers per YouTube stream. They have many more than that. But the point is, we're small. We're small. We're in the thousands. And that a civil disobedience movement does not make. But you could do this. You could start a movement. Start a movement. Not of kooks, which is the danger here. But a real movement to stand up to the government and demand our freedoms, to demand they do the right thing. Someone says, are there other things on top of writing we can do to fight this? Yeah. I mean, it's all in the same vein. Write, speak, and keep doing that. I don't know what else there is. Share, do the YouTube things, share, like, find articles that strengthen your point, post them on Facebook, post them everywhere. Find articles about how the free market is helping here. Dislike, intervene when people are, tell people, no, I don't think the government is doing the right thing. No. I don't think a lockdown is necessary. No. I don't think government takeover of healthcare, government takeover of the hospitals is the right thing. No. I don't think Trump has done the right thing. No, I don't think Cuomo has done the right thing. I think they're weak, pathetic politicians that know only one thing, which is the fist. Know only one thing, which is coercion. They're not thinkers. And what we need right now are thinkers. Let's see. Rand ideas took off in a harder economic times of the 60s and 70s. 60s were not hard economic times. 60s, the economy was booming. It's the 70s were bad economic times. Atlas Shrugged sales hit record in '08. It's time to double down on message. Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I think there is a chance that this economic crisis will lead people to discover Ayn Rand, will lead people to read Atlas Shrugged. But only if we're out there showing them there's an alternative. Jonathan Hoenig is the only one on TV today saying no to all these things. You guys need to demand more voices like that on television. You have power. Your power is in speaking and writing. Your power is through social media. But you gotta focus that power. You've gotta, however many thousands of people out there who support these ideas have got to band together on the internet and advocate for certain ideas and tilt the discussion and get the media engaged and get journalists engaged and get them thinking about alternative ways of looking at the world. Thoughtful ways of looking at the world. Fed continually does stimulus. What happens to the economy? I mean, Fed is doing this massive stimulus, basically saying we'll give as much money as needs be to provide liquidity to markets. What happens is it thoroughly, fundamentally, systematically distorts the economy. It makes wealth creation long-term difficult. It shores up the economy in the short run and sets it up for failure in the long run. So I don't think, like other people, that the outcome is hyperinflation or complete collapse or the dark ages or whatever. I don't think that, because I think there's an enormous amount of productive genius in America that keeps this economy going. But I do think it distorts, it hampers, and it makes this country a lot less able to grow and create wealth and produce and succeed in the future. The pain we suffer from what the Federal Reserve is doing and the stimulus package the government is doing, will be slow to no economic growth in our future. Stagnation. Long-term stagnation until we really change our ways. How come some people can evade reality their entire lives while others can't? Well, everybody can. To evade reality is a choice. You want to evade reality, you can. I mean, you can't because you have too much respect for your own life. You can't because you love yourself and you love your life too much. But so it's not an issue of can or can't. It's an issue of the choice you make. And some of us can't do it because it's stupid. It's it's self-destructive, and we're not willing to engage in self-destruction. We're not willing to engage in self-destruction. Today, I watched what I thought would be an innocuous April Fool's joke video from an entertainment YouTube channel. It brutally attacked capitalism regarding the pandemic. I counter-argued in the comments, but I was alone. Well, thank you for counter-argument in the comments. You never know who might read those comments and be swayed by your words, and use the opportunity of commenting to link to good material. Link to Ayn Rand's books, link to the Ayn Rand Institute, link to me, link to places. You are not going to make all the arguments. But if somebody wants to follow up, if somebody finds what you're saying intriguing, you got to give them hooks to go find out more. But yes, everybody is going to come out of this crisis anti-capitalist. Everybody is going to come out of this crisis anti-capitalist. Capitalism will be blamed for everything, just like it was in 2008, just like it was in the Great Depression. Capitalism will be blamed, and if we don't stand up, if we don't defend it, then we have nobody but ourselves to blame. So we have to speak up for capitalism. This crisis would not be a crisis if not for capitalism. Virus is nothing for a capitalist economy in terms of dealing with. We'd be so much wealthier. Our hospitals would be so much more sophisticated. Our ability to create vaccines would be so much more superior. Our ability to make antivirals that are effective on the fly would be so much better. Ability to keep people alive who are sick until we develop those medications would be so much better. The wealth that we would have, the productive capacity that we would have. It's just unimaginable. So, no, you got to fight for capitalism, and you got to try to explain that to people. And of course, as I said, the planning, the preparation, the thinking. Businesses under freedom think. That's how you make money, by thinking. Exact opposite of politics. What does Dr. Peikoff think of this lockdown? I don't know. I mean, he is under lockdown because he is obviously susceptible to all of this. He's in the age group that is very susceptible, and I would not want to be speaking for Dr. Peikoff. I'll let him, when all this is freed up, if he has the opportunity, if he wants to speak about it, but I'm not going to speak for him. I hope that what I'm saying represents Ayn Rand's and Leonard's views well, but there's no guarantee of either of that. On Phil Donahue, Rand said that the mystery of space does not impress her. Doesn't impress you. Are you at all awed by the expanse of the universe? No, I don't think awed is the right word. I mean, there's a beauty in it. I mean, I find thinking about it frustrating, I guess, and just I can't get my head around it. I can't get a head around its size and its shape, even though shape doesn't mean anything in this context. But it doesn't. It's not awe-inspiring. It doesn't. It just is, right? And I don't see it as a mystery, right? I find it. I don't even find it. I have to admit this, even though, and this is not. This is just me. This is me. This is not objectivism. It's not you, and it's not an opinion that you have to hold. Nothing I say is an opinion you have to hold. But I'm not that interested in the science even of space. I mean, personally, I'm interested in science. I find biology fascinating because it has real implications and applications. I find science that is focused on this world, or science, for example, that would allow us to colonize Mars. That is fascinating. I don't know. I just find gravitational waves or whatever it is, or black holes and everything. Okay. I mean, that's why I didn't go into physics. I studied physics. I never became passionate about it. I just don't find it that interesting. I'm much more oriented to this world, to how do you make this stuff? How does the science apply to my life? That the kind of science that has application to my life is what I find awe-inspiring, right? I'm in awe of great businessmen. I'm in awe of Isaac Newton. I'm in awe of Steve Jobs. I'm in awe of, what makes me, this is what makes, I can't remember how many transistors there are on a modern computer chip. So maybe somebody in the chat can tell me. How many transistors are there on like an i7 Intel chip today? Now, I can't remember if it's billions or whatever transistors. Now, I know what a transistor is. I can imagine one in real space, one, right? But we're talking about a tiny little chip this size, has millions or billions of them. That I'm in awe of. That we could do that you could fit that many electronic pieces onto a chip. That to me is, truly awe-inspiring, and truly amazing. So those are the kind of things that I'm in awe of. I didn't get any answer to the hundreds of billions, somebody says, hundreds of billions of transistors on a little chip in your computer. Somebody says 2 billions. Somebody says hundreds of billions. Anyway, billions. I mean, that is, I can't get my head around that. And that to me is far more interesting, far more inspiring, far more, creates awe than black holes. Right? Somebody says 1.75 billion. I mean, that's stunning. And by the way, I hope you've listened to my interview with Matt Ridley. I thought it was just a fun interview, and you should listen to it. But his book on innovation is fabulous because to me that's awe-inspiring. Is all the stories of great innovators and how they changed our lives, and how they came up with the discoveries and implemented, the technologies that made those discoveries affect our lives. Is it immoral, irrational to work for cash off the books? No, of course not. I mean, you have to take into account the danger of being caught and the price you might pay. But no, I mean, if you can avoid being robbed, then you should avoid being robbed. Is it possible to retire on $1 million? I mean, yes. It depends on the quality of life you want, right? So you'd have to do the math on how many years do you expect to live, what age would you be retiring, how much do you need to consume per year. My guess is $1 million is enough to retire on. 5% of $1 million is $50,000. Can you live on $50,000 a year for the rest of your life? You won't earn 5% every year, and sometimes you'll get a hit like right now. But I think 5% is a reasonable number. I think a lot of people can live on 5%. If you can't earn 5%, if you can only earn 2%, then you can't probably live on $20,000 a year. So you'd probably need $2 million. So you're going to have to make the calculation based on what kind of return you think you can get on the money and how long you intend to live and what is your cost of living and where are you living? Are you living in Puerto Rico? Are you living in Manhattan? Are you living in Costa Rica? I mean, it depends on where you live, which will depend on your cost of living, which will depend on how much money you need in order to retire. Do you think those Phil Donahue interviews made Ayn Rand look good? Is Phil Donahue thoroughly corrupt and dishonest? Absolutely, it made her feel look good. I know so many people who were intrigued enough from those interviews to go out and buy her books and read her. So I definitely think they stimulated what you wanted. I mean, she didn't convince anybody. She intrigued them enough to go read a book. And that's what you want. Is Phil Donahue thoroughly corrupt and dishonest? I mean, he is corrupt and dishonest. There's no question about that in my mind. Is he thoroughly corrupt and dishonest? I don't know. And I don't know him well enough to know how corrupt. I mean, certainly dishonest. I don't know if he's corrupt. What do you think about the Daily Kos article that says the Republican response is insane because the Republicans believe in Atlas Shrugged? Well, I haven't read the article, but I think it's a pathetic article for two reasons. Because it's right that the Republican response is insane, but for the wrong reasons. Daily Kos probably wanted the Republicans to be more statist than they already are. So it identifies insanity with the wrong behavior. And it assumes Republicans are inspired by Atlas Shrugged, which is complete garbage. I wish. But it's just not true. Republicans are the opposite. Republicans are the villains of Atlas Shrugged, not the heroes. How about California? I mean, California's a disaster. And again, California is shutting people down, although less so than where I am in Puerto Rico and in some other places. The virus has slowed down, but again, when are they going to open it up? And what happens when they open it up? And what happens to cases then? And what is the plan? What is Gavin Newsom's plan for getting California back on its feet after this is over? How's that going to happen? How do you end this? Is there an exit strategy? You don't go to war unless you've got a strategy for winning and a strategy for exiting. What's the strategy for exiting? What's the strategy for winning? None of these politicians have it. Now, California, with all its problems, all its regulations, all its crazy spending and socialist agenda, is probably the most productive place in the United States, or has the most productive people in the United States. So California, in spite of all of that, I think will recover. At least parts of it. At least some people will. Because that's where much of our productive genius lives. Unfortunately. I wish they lived somewhere else. Right? And to the extent California is lifting regulations right now, good. The problem is that, it won't be long after the crisis is over and they'll return all those regulations back. Okay, Trump bucks for Iran. I guess that's money for me. The rest goes to a virtual reality set. Cool, good for you. Please never stop yelling. Don't worry. Even if I wanted to stop yelling, I don't think I literally could. There's only so much you can achieve with free will. Anthony Fauci was appointed the director of the NIH on 2nd of November 1984. This guy's been part of the government since 1984. At the beginning of the Reagan second term. 35 years is more than enough time to become a full-fledged party line touring bureaucrat. Now, I don't know if he's all of that. And I give him kudos for standing up to Trump on certain issues. But bureaucracy, NIH, not places for innovation, not places for long-term planning. And you have to ask yourself, where was he? Why weren't there plans for dealing with the pandemic? Why, if there were plans, why weren't they followed? Where was he in the first days of this? So I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed by what the CDC did. Now, I was told that the CDC wanted to behave differently, wanted to do different things, didn't agree with Trump in various points, and were too afraid to challenge him and folded and gave in to him. And you notice the CDC has no role anymore, very little role. It's now FEMA, when this should be the CDC, because Trump didn't like the fact that he got opposition from the CDC. He doesn't like other points of view. He doesn't like to listen to people who disagree with him, which is the exact opposite of a great CEO. A great executive manager wants to hear, particularly at times of crisis, great generals want to hear what people who oppose their position want to hear different points of view. Not Trump. He doesn't have the self-esteem to actually listen to somebody who disagrees with him. He feels attacked. He feels belittled by somebody disagreeing with him. Somebody says, there's no way to find out my views on immigration. I mean, that's bizarre. There are, if you look up immigration on my YouTube channel, there are like a bunch of videos and audio. You can actually find a kind of a friendly debate I did on the issue with Dr. Peikoff. You can find hours and hours and hours and hours of me talking about immigration. So you can find my views on immigration. They're there. Not that hard. Not that hard. And, you know, maybe I'll do another show on immigration just to bring it back. But I hate that topic because I've talked about it so much. So, let's see. Could America become a poor country because of this? I mean, not in the short run. It takes a long time to destroy wealth. Think about poor countries. The Soviet Union never had freedom, never had capitalism, stayed poor forever under communism. Venezuela, total nationalization, destruction of the farming industry, destruction of the oil industry. We're nowhere near that. To become poor would take probably, this is again my difference with some libertarian economists. It would take a long time for this country to literally become poor. There's way too much wealth, productive ability, productive capacity in this country to become poor anytime soon. Regarding inability to evade reality, Rand said, I am not brave enough to be a coward. Yes, I remember this quote. I'm not brave enough to be a coward. I see the consequences too clearly. Yes. How could you evade reality? It's suicidal, destructive. Had question yesterday on Peikoff's treaty on objectivism. I don't know, did I miss that? I think you were asking about OPA. OPA is the most important single book in philosophy. It is a systematic presentation of the philosophy. I often mention it as a book that everybody interested in Ayn Rand's ideas must read. It is the best, the only, but it's not just the only, so this is what we got. No, it's the only and great actual presentation of objectivism in a systematic, thorough basis by the number one student of objectivism ever, the number one philosopher of objectivism after Ayn Rand, Leonard Peikoff. So if you want to know objectivism, the book to read, if you want to understand Ayn Rand's ideas from a philosophical perspective, the book to read is Dr. Peikoff's Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. And the Ayn Rand Institute pitches it all the time. It's on our website. It's going to have its 30th anniversary next year. And the plan at the Institute is to make a big deal out of the publication of OPA. It was published in 1991. I remember in 91, 92, I did a reading group, a study group of OPA. We went chapter by chapter with questions. It was fun. I mean, we did that over, I think it took us a year to get through the book. Leonard is a genius, and the book is a magnificent production, and a representation, I think a thorough, honest representation of objectivism. How can we differentiate objectivism from the cries of anarchists who will use COVID as an excuse for decrying all government intervention? That's a good question. I think the way to do it is to say that we do believe the government has a role. The government has a role in isolating people who have the virus. The government has a role in figuring out who has it and who doesn't have it, in tracking them down and isolating them. And if they won't isolate voluntarily, enforcing isolation on them. The government has a role in declaring an emergency. In my view, you should have an emergency declaration by Congress that gives the executive the power to test and isolate people who have the virus. So I think we believe government has an important role. And you could even imagine in an extreme emergency, which I don't think we have right now, in an extreme emergency, you can imagine a situation where the government actually has a lockdown. I give an example, but the lockdown has to be, the purpose needs to be clear. It needs to be based on science and facts. It needs to be short-term, and there needs to be a clear exit strategy. It needs to be, in other words, objective. And that's not what's going on right now. I'll give you an example where the government would do a lockdown, not related to a pandemic. Let's say there's a terrorist attack in your neighborhood. And there's a shootout between the police or the special forces and the terrorists. And it's quite legitimate for the government to lock down the neighborhood and say nobody can leave because you're interfering in a police action. You're interfering in a military action. And as soon as we've killed the terrorist, and as soon as we've done what we need to do with the crime scene, you can now come out of your homes. So there's a clear and present danger. There's a real threat. We have to deal with it. It's finite. Victory is clear. Once victory is achieved, the lockdown goes away. So government has a role. Whoops, I just deleted something that I didn't want to. Are you worried about the future of your children? Yeah, absolutely. I've been worried about the future of my children since they were born, because I think this country has been deteriorating since they were born, since long before they were born. I am very worried about the future of all of us, and certainly of anybody young. I think this country is going to hell. I think it's slowly, it has these bursts of acceleration and then it slows down. But generally the direction is towards authoritarianism. It's toward mindlessness. It's towards collectivism and tribalism. It's towards raising up the worst elements in our society, left and right, to position of power. And I've said from the beginning that Donald Trump's presidency is a significant event in that long deterioration into nothingness. And if this response to the pandemic is not an example of how Donald Trump has perverted and distorted the presidency, lowered our expectations of what presidential means, made a mockery of the office, made a mockery of our rights, made a mockery of planning, made a mockery of the government's job, then if you don't see that, then it makes me even more depressed for the future, because you are the hope. And if you can't see that the guy in the White House is a monstrosity, a pragmatic, unthinking narcissist, who in his every action is sending the country backwards, then I don't know what to say. I've tried over the last 4 years to make that case. I don't seem to have succeeded, so makes me very pessimistic about the future. All right, we're gonna stop it here, because, I mean, not stop it here, but no more Super Chat questions. I've got 4 left. We're going to do the 4, and then that'll be enough. Long day. Is it moral to sell things to a corrupt individual if he's offering top dollars? Well, it depends. It depends how corrupt he is. It depends what he's going to do with the things. If you're selling weapons to a corrupt individual who might use them against you, then absolutely it's immoral. If you're selling him the means by which he can violate the rights of other people, then yes, it's immoral. If you're a grocery store owner and you know this guy's a bad guy, he's buying groceries, not necessarily, it really depends on the circumstances. But, I mean, if the guy is truly an evil person, I don't know, then yeah, you should not have anything to do with him, which means boycott him from your life. So the more corrupt he is, the more you should distance, the less you should have any interaction with him. What did you like about Nikki Haley's foreign policy? Would you ever consider reaching out to her one day, since she is a decent advocate for freedom? I mean, decent is right. She's not great, but she's decent. But decent is all we got. Yeah, I'll probably reach out to her at some point. I'm sure I know people who know her. I know people who know her. I'm sure I could get at some point, if I wanted a meeting with her. I'm not sure what I would tell her, what I could achieve in that meeting. She had a decent foreign policy in terms of standing up for American interests, standing up to evil, naming evil. She was much better than Trump on Russia. She was much better than Trump on the Middle East, I thought, on the Saudis. So yeah, I mean, I was impressed with her at the UN. She was very pro-Israel, very pro the friends of America. Can you expound on the idea that the CDC wanted to do things differently, but Trump quashed it? Any sources we can go to read up? I don't have any sources. It's just somebody who knows the CDC well, who was in, I guess, some of those conversations, or who people at the CDC confided in. That early on, the CDC, when Trump was saying it's just a flu, don't worry about it, everything's fine, nothing to do. I mean, the CDC didn't want a travel ban. The CDC didn't want him to say it was just a flu. The CDC wanted him to prepare, to put in place the things that were necessary to get our system ready for what was coming. And he didn't do anything for at least a month. I mean, there was between the travel ban and early March, nothing was done. Nothing was done. And that's, I think, what the CDC was objecting to. Why are all the environmentalists dead silent with a 12-year doomsday scenario? I mean, the COVID crisis. Nobody is taking them seriously. I mean, I saw somebody on Facebook write that as soon as this is over, coronavirus will be blamed on global warming. And I think that's right. I think we haven't heard the end of the environmentalists. This is dominating the news right now, but they will be back with a vengeance once this is done. Many of them are celebrating right now because this is slowing down the global economy, therefore slowing down the consumption of CO2, slowing down the consumption of fossil fuels. So I think many of them are celebrating. They're too busy celebrating. But we will hear from them again. They are not gone away. They are eager to blame all of our problems on climate change, on human activity. It's our fault. And if more of us die, environmentalists, the real radicals, the real believers, are happy about it. I missed somebody's super chat. What was the question? Let me go back and see if I can find it. I try to catch everything. I don't see it. I don't see it. Can you ask in the non-super chat? Just ask it down here, Andrew. And I'll see. All right. So I don't know about a show tomorrow, but tomorrow at 11 a.m. East Coast time, I will be interviewed at some conference in Israel via teleconference. So you can find this. I've posted on Facebook and on Twitter. You can find the information, but it's open to anybody. It's free. Anybody around the world. I'll be interviewed by a journalist who's actually in the United States, but she's Israeli. And it'll be me, and actually one of my favorite intellectuals, a guy I have a huge amount of respect for, Fleming Rose, who published the Danish cartoons, if you remember, the Danish cartoons that infuriated the Islamic world. He will be on with me to talk about the coronavirus, so it'll be interesting to see what he has to say about it. He lives in Denmark, where there's major shutdown in Denmark. But its neighbor Sweden is not under shutdown, so it's kind of interesting to see the difference between the two. By the way, Sweden is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting what happens in Sweden and what we can learn from Sweden, and if we will learn anything from Sweden. So I'm not seeing Andrew's question, and I don't see Andrew asking it, so I am going to call it a night. Starts with, I don't like being told what to do. I don't see that question, so ask the full question. You don't like being told what to do, and the question is... All right, guys, stay safe, stay healthy, stay mad, stay furious. Do you remember there was an old movie? Network, it was called. Network. Oh, by the way, Jonathan Honing is going to be on tomorrow as well. Right after my session, he will be on with Tom Palmer from the Atlas Network. And he will also be interviewed by the same Israeli journalist on the coronavirus. So we will have me and Fleming Rose for an hour, and then Jonathan Honing and Tom Palmer for the second hour. They wanted to put me and Jonathan on in the same hour. And I said, no. You got to spread the objectivists out. There's got to be objectivists over the whole 2 hours. Don't concentrate all the objectivists into 1 hour. Spread them out so you have the voice of sanity throughout. So Andrew writes, I don't like being told what to do. I sense joy in the intellectuals online who are lecturing everyone on what to do, especially those in favor of shutdowns. Absolutely, Andrew. I mean, it is sick, the number of intellectuals, the politicians, and their acolytes who like this, who think this is a time for kumbaya, for we're all in this together, you get a sense that they love emergencies. They love to be in the spotlight. They love to be at the center of attention, and they love to have solutions. Solutions that violate our rights, solutions that place them in authority over us, and they love that. So yes, I completely am with you, Andrew. I think that is exactly the situation in which they are. I completely sense the same thing, the same cynical attitude of domination, of superiority, of relishing the opportunity to run our lives for us. So in Network, the movie, at one point the guy says, and this is a theme throughout the movie, I think he says, I'm mad and I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, you should be mad and you shouldn't take it anymore. You should be outraged and you shouldn't take it anymore. Make your voices heard. Don't just count on me yelling. You need to yell. Don't ask me what to do. You figure out what to do. You figure out how to be entrepreneurs of ideas. You figure out how to go out there and make your voices heard. You want to do civil disobedience? Organize a movement around civil disobedience. You want to yell out your window? You want to start, you saw those clapping things and banging on pots to honor doctors and nurses, which I'm all for, by the way, huge honor. But figure out a way to do that in honor of our freedoms. You figure out how to do this. You can't rely on me, on ARI, on somebody else. We do what we know how to do. We do what we can do. But I don't have all the answers. You figure out the answers. Stand up for reason, individualism. Stand up for the profit motive. Stand up for capitalism. And let's go change the world. All right. Have a good night. Share. Like. And don't forget to support the show, yaronbrookshow.com/support. Or on Locals, or on Subscribestar, or on Patreon. See you all, I don't know, either tomorrow or Sunday or something like that. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.